Leonard, played by Westbrook. Ginobili for three. Yes! 1 point lead for San Antonio. Terry, a long three. Bang! Jason Terry gives the Mavericks a 7-point lead with 33 seconds remaining. Rebound, O'Neal, coming up short. Horry for the win.
Simmers bringing in 5 seconds to go. Tie game. Seatbelts are fastened. Lou Williams for the win. Bingo!
Oh my goodness.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Six Man Podcast. I am your host, Cam Koenig, here broadcasting live from Wrigleyville, Chicago, Illinois. Joining with me tonight, somewhere off the campus of Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis, is Zachary Barnett. Zach, how are you doing today?
Better than the IUPUI basketball team. They get a win last week and then immediately get spanked by the Penguins of Youngstown State. So,
hey, first Division I win, we take those.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you really can't complain too much, but I still want to. It's a growing team. That's kind of what their coach has been preaching all year, is patience from the players. So I give them a couple of years. They'll be back to their, 18 and 15, 18 and 12 kind of seasons where they can, start to maybe get some momentum in recruiting and things like that.
Well, that's really all I can ask for, especially in a league like the Horizon League. So we are recording this on Monday, February the 21st. We are officially less than a month away from the kickoff of March Madness, the kickoff of the tournament. We have been wanting to do an episode like this for quite a while. This is basically going to be our, if you haven't paid attention to college basketball at all this year, now is a good time to start. This is going to be our primer for the last month of the season. There are some important games still to be decided with about, anywhere from a week or so to 2 weeks left of conference play. We're rolling into conference tournament time. And sooner than later, you will be filling out your bracket for your work office bracket challenge. And we're here to help you for this. But first things first, there is one thing that has kind of been dominating the past 24 hours in college basketball. That is the melee, the ruckus, the fricassee that happened at the end of the Michigan-Wisconsin game. If you hadn't seen it, Wisconsin won that game by about 15 points. However, Michigan kept their starters in basically the entire game. They were pressing Wisconsin's reserves in the last minute of the game. Greg Gard called a timeout in order to help set up an offense to break that press. Michigan coach Juwan Howard had a little bit of a issue with that, to say the least. And in the handshake line, Juwan Howard said something along the lines of, we will remember that shit, and he tried to blow past Greg Gard. Greg Gard kind of held him up for a sec, like, yo, what do you mean? Here's what I was thinking. One thing led to another. Juwan Howard slapped a assistant head coach from Michigan. You had another assistant coach from Wisconsin. You had another assistant coach from Wisconsin doing the suck it chant at the Michigan bench as they walked away. Just an ugly scene, all in all. Zach, did you see that video that was posted of the kind of like the Zapruder film of this little encounter between Juwan Howard and Greg Gard?
I did not. I watched the end of that game, and then of course the everybody posted the highlights, the 25-30 seconds of the spat there. This kind of reminds me of when George Bush had a shoe thrown at him when he was like in the courtroom in Iran or whatever. Like that's what this like kind of feels like, where it's like, you know, kind of dumb, but also kind of hilarious at the same time. I mean, obviously at this point it's not funny for Juwan Howard, but I find it quite amusing. Wisconsin had what was coming to them, so I'm kind of happy for it, honestly.
Yeah, as a neutral in this, and as a fan of a team, well, as a fan of a team that has been beaten by both of these teams, as a fan of a team that had Wisconsin players, kind of, you know, playing the heel, if we're going to continue the wrestling comparisons, when they beat Indiana at Assembly Hall a couple weeks ago. This is I'm going to put it this way. This is going to sound bad, but Greg Gard and Wisconsin kind of have like a rat team thing going for them. This is kind of how they've been playing, especially if you're Brad Davison, all year, where they're going to get in your face and they're going to, try and cause a reaction of some kind, just to, it's kind of like some mind games. Brad Davidson has been pointed out that he kind of is may or may not be a bit of a flop artist when he, his proficiency in drawing charges. But it is what it is. Juwan Howard has been suspended for the rest of Michigan's regular season, which I believe
It's 5
is
games.
5 games. Michigan is 8-7 in the Big Ten right now. They are 14-11 here going into the tournament. We'll talk about it here in a second. I do think, Michigan they're playing against what I consider 5 tournament teams to end their season. It's going to be tough without Juwan Howard, but they have opportunities to pick up some really quality wins, with 4 of those games being at home to end the rest of the regular season.
Yeah, with this, I think, in the NBA, you don't need a head coach usually. I mean, we've seen that time and time again where just players can take over games. But in college basketball, usually the talent pool is so balanced, especially in these major conferences where pretty much everybody has a similar talent level overall, from players like 3 through 7, And because of that balance, the coaching you have plays a major role. So we'll see. Michigan has some good assistant coaches, though, so I'm not super worried about.
Yeah, they do. I mean, I will say Michigan does have probably the best assistant head coach in the game in, what's his name? In Phil Martelli. If there's anyone who can lead that roster without Juwan Howard, it's going to be him. He's got. I mean, this is going to be a good opportunity for him. I do think Michigan is going to. I think the players are going to respond to this. They have, their next game. They have their next 2 games are against Rutgers and Illinois. Like I said, they have a thing with Illinois. That's going to be an interesting game as well. But like I said, I think it's a fair suspension in the long run. But with that out of the way, we are going to kind of dive in head first, really, to the state of college basketball with just under a month left before Selection Sunday. We're going to talk about the power conferences. We're going to talk about the major conferences. We're going to talk about it all, really. So how we're going to do this, we're basically just going to get you up to speed a little bit, give you the heads up, like, hey, here's who's at the top of the conferences. These are the teams that you're probably going to be seeing in March. We're not going to talk about them all. We certainly don't have that kind of time. But if something comes up, we will certainly spend a minute or 2 talking about a team if we have something to add. Zach, are you ready? Are you strapped in for this?
I've done limited research. I've watched a lot of college basketball, so I'm hoping my hour or so I spent at work kind of compiling my thoughts and what games I've watched, which is quite a bit of, non-Power 5 schools basketball teams, is, the ESPN Plus value, paying $6.99 a month for that and watching every basketball game possible. So I'm hoping that, I have just enough to keep up with you on this.
That's good to hear. So we're going to start with the Atlantic Coast Conference. I I'm seeing about 5 teams that I think are locks for the tournament. I don't necessarily think the bubble is really going to affect the ACC that much unless there's a really, really bad loss from one of these teams. But the teams I have Duke, who's probably going to be a 1 or 2 seed, and then you have Notre Dame, Miami, North Carolina, and Wake Forest. All of those teams are sitting in the 12-4, 11-6 in conference. Notre Dame, Miami, and North Carolina are all 19-8. Wake Forest is 21-7. I would say they're definitely a lock. They picked up a really good win against Notre Dame. They almost knocked off Duke. They almost knocked off Miami. They have wins against North Carolina. This is the one thing I will say. I don't have much to say about the ACC. I do think, though, it's been a down year for the ACC, and that's kind of weird considering the expectations, the tradition, the overall level of talent, of coaching talent that is in the Atlantic Coast Conference. Obviously, this being Coach K's last year before John Shire takes over. He has Duke right now as the only ranked team in the ACC this year. Obviously, that's bolstered by likely top 4 pick Paolo Banchero. They're getting really good games out of Wendell Moore, who I think is going to be, an NBA draft pick this year. But the ACC, I think overall, top to bottom, much, much weaker than it has been in previous years, especially considering Virginia, Syracuse, Virginia Tech, Florida State, Louisville, Georgia Tech, all on the outside looking in going into the last week of February, Zach.
Yeah, and one of the teams I really want to highlight here is the Florida State team. I was really high on them coming into the year, and they've really disappointed me. Obviously, they hung that banner up. This was we were top 4, whatever, when the season ended, and everybody's memed about that. But really, I think Florida State's been a pretty big disappointment. And then on the flip side, Wake Forest, in Steve Forbes' second year after taking over for Danny Manning, has been amazing. He has been really good. And honestly, this is probably the best year they've had since Chris Paul played in the Wake Forest.
Yeah, I think I think this definitely the work that Steve Forbes has done at Wake Forest, I think, puts him in, if you want to call it, the top 5 for National Coach of the Year. I certainly think, it should be between him and Bray for Coach of the Year in the ACC. But yeah, talking about Florida State, they came into this season, I think, pretty much projected to be one of the top 2 teams in the league, right up there with Duke. And they're sitting at 7-9 in conference. They had a 6-game losing streak there. They're 14-12 overall. They don't necessarily have a marquee out-of-conference win. I would say their best out-of-conference win is at Mizzou. So, this is a team that has certainly, the Leonard Hamilton has had a recipe for success the past couple years. They haven't necessarily had the star power, even though they have had really high draft picks in Patrick Williams and Scotty Barnes. A lot of those guys are based off of potential, and you just haven't necessarily seen that same player really kind of take over at Florida State this year.
Yeah, and I mean, similarly, Louisville, who many kind of predicted would be middle of the pack, I think has still been pretty disappointing for their standards, only 12-14.
Exactly. Louisville, actually, they do not have anyone averaging more than 10 points a game,
Yeah,
which is pretty surprising for a Division One college basketball. I mean, that's pretty surprising for a high school basketball team,
yeah.
really.
You think about all the talent that they've put through that program over the years. Obviously, they've had their fair share of off the court issues. So I imagine that that's played a major role in why the team struggled this year. But ACC tournament, you always have a surprise team who wins a couple of games, whether it's
Yeah. I mean,
Georgia
last
Tech,
year we
NC
saw,
State.
yeah, Georgia Tech won the thing last year. I think this is probably Duke's tournament to lose.
I think Duke's
Um,
just the most talented team by a
yes,
mile.
absolutely.
But it's not really that close. I mean, North
Yeah,
Carolina is probably second, but they don't play like a team.
because
So
if you look at it, Duke's their three conference losses have been by a combined total of 4 points. Two to Miami, one to Florida State, one to Virginia. Um, I think if you look at like some of their challengers, probably Wake Forest, I would say, they had that 2 point win over Wake Forest. Miami has been really good against them. So we'll see how the ACC tournament plays out. I think it's probably going to come down to seeding for them because if everything kind of stays the same, Duke may have to play like North Carolina or Wake Forest in the semifinals, which could get very interesting if like Notre Dame and Miami are on the other side of that bracket for them.
yeah, and like let's not factor out Virginia too, who just
Yeah,
historically gets better in tournament time. I mean, they're like the Michigan State of the coast. So
exactly. And
um,
I do think like if there's a team that could potentially work its way into the tournament from the ACC, um, I think it is Virginia. They have a big game against Duke on Wednesday. Then they play Florida State. Then they finish up at Louisville. So I think if you can get a win against Duke, I think Virginia um, could really get itself closer to a bid, especially if they combine that with a solid conference tournament run.
yeah, and speaking of Virginia, let's pivot now to the Big 12. I think is the next conference up, if I'm not mistaken.
Smooth transition.
Yeah, West Virginia being the biggest disappointment in the Big 12. It,
Yep.
obviously we should probably talk about highlights first, but I really want to talk about West Virginia because I again was super high on this team coming into the year. This just
Yep.
shows like how unpredictable college basketball is.
Exactly. And West Virginia has some really good wins. They have a win against Pittsburgh. They have wins against Clemson, UConn, at UAB. They have beaten Iowa State, but they're 3-10 in conference. The Big 12 easily, I would say, the strongest conference from top to bottom. And I think that you can kind of guess that based off of I think the four teams who are solidly in the tournament for the Big 12, that's Kansas, Texas Tech, Baylor, and Texas. Kansas looks like it's going to win yet another regular season Big 12 tournament. And then you kind of have everybody else in the Big 12, and I do think there are three teams that have a shot of getting in that are just kind of jockeying for position at this point. And I think that's TCU, Iowa State, who had an incredible non-conference schedule, but struggled at the beginning of conference tournament. But then they picked up a huge win against the last team on my list, and that's Oklahoma, who even though they have a 14-13 record, I wouldn't necessarily count Oklahoma out if they can finish strong. Oklahoma has wins against Florida. They have a win against Arkansas. They have that win. They kind of split with Iowa State. They've beaten Texas Tech. They have a chance to again probably make another deep run into the tournament. But if we're talking about it, you have I think three teams in the Big 12 who could maybe two teams in the Big 12 now with Baylor's injury to Chachuma Chenway. I know I'm mispronouncing that, but that's as good as an opportunity as you're going to get. But Kansas, again, has been really good. They're getting, a potential player of the year performance out of Ochai Abaji this year. And Texas Tech, who I think has been a little bit of a surprise. They had the good roster. Chris Beard left to go coach Texas, but they have really that team has really found some momentum coming out of their previous years, and I think Texas Tech is a team that could, is a really big threat to make another Final Four run this year. They've been playing really well. They're getting really good contributions out of everybody on that team. They're 8th in net at the moment in the net rankings. They're 10th in KenPom. They're 2nd in adjusted defense. And I think that's really how Texas Tech could really be a threat going forward to some of these other top teams.
Oppositely, I think Texas is not really a threat. I have watched a lot of Longhorns basketball because that's usually what our school has on, because whenever we're in the campus center or whatever. And I know Texas has beat Kansas and they've beat Iowa State pretty soundly. They have that win early this year against Tennessee. But I swear every time I watch a Texas game, they get up 10-15 and then they blow a lead, and it ends up being a 1 or 2 point game whether they win or lose. And come tournament time, that's just not how things are going to work for them. They blew it against Seton Hall early in the season. And then, of course, their game against Gonzaga, which they led most of the way, and then Gonzaga tore them to shreds at the end.
Yeah, I think the problem with Texas is you don't really get too consistent of scoring from them. It's like if Courtney Ramey or Andrew Jones is off, then I think they sometimes struggle to find offense from other sources. Those two. So Andrew Jones had 20 points in the game against Texas Tech. Nobody else was in double digits. They shot 28%. Texas did from the field, and they have had other games like that where they kind of just struggle to score sometimes, and that really concerns me heading forward. I do think Texas is a good team. They have a win. They won their Big 12 SEC Challenge game against Tennessee. Yes, they have struggled against Texas Tech, but I do think the emotions that Texas Tech has brought into those games have really carried them. And I do think Texas, not a team that you're going to want to play. Not necessarily sure where they're going to fall on the bracket. But if they come across a really good defensive team, or if they come across a team that can get them into a track meet, that may be something that you want to avoid when you're filling yours out this year.
Let's go back to the bubble teams. I think TCU should get in.
I agree. I think TCU is probably the most secure of those teams. They are 5-7 in conference, but they still have 6 games left to go. 2 of those against West Virginia, and they have some opportunities to pick up wins against Texas, against Texas Tech, 2 against Kansas.
Yeah, I think if they go 3-3 down the stretch here, and then maybe win a game or 2 in their tournament, they'll be fine. Here's the team that's really polarizing apparently on Twitter. Who the hell knew that Iowa State basketball had fans?
And who knew that they were fans of our podcast too?
Even even greater. I'm going to badmouth Iowa State here for a second. I think this team should not be in. I get they had a good non-conference schedule, but when you look at their non-conference wins, their best win I think was against a reeling team in Memphis at the beginning of the season.
Well, I mean, you look at it. Let's look. I mean, let's look at it. They beat Xavier, who we're going to talk about the Big East here next. Xavier, I think, solidly in the tournament. They beat Creighton, a Big East team that's on the bubble, but still a solid team. And then they beat Iowa by 20 points. And Iowa, I think, Iowa snuck back into the top 25 this week. Again, I think another solid tournament team.
But see, you can't follow those up with like blowout losses to West Virginia and blowout losses to teams like Kansas State. I get they beat Missouri, but I'm pretty sure everybody's beat Missouri this year.
They had a rough start to their conference schedule. They're 5-9 only, but like 8 wins in the Big Ten, 7 wins in the Big 12. Like, may be good enough this year because like the Big 12 is that deep. And I do think they have had 2 back-to-back big wins at TCU against Oklahoma. They have a game Wednesday versus West Virginia. They have a game against Kansas State on Saturday with a Kansas State team who I do think is close to being on the bubble as well.
They need to win their next 3, and then I could safely say that they've probably done it. But if they drop this game against West Virginia at home on Wednesday,
that could be some trouble.
Or if they lose to Oklahoma State, who is I think 500 in the Big 12, but
and that's the Oklahoma State 6-8 in conference, 13-13 overall. Yeah. That is the worst overall record in the Big 12 is 500 this year.
Yeah, so I'm thinking if they drop any of those next 3 games, they could be in a world of hurt because I even with the injuries, I don't think they're beating Baylor at the end of the season. That's going to be in Waco. I just don't see it. And then I think Oklahoma, they are really on the outside looking in right now at 4-10 in the conference.
Yeah, I would agree. I think they're going to have to.
They'll probably have to win out.
Have to beat Texas Tech tomorrow, and I would think they're probably going to need 2 wins in the conference. They're probably going to need to get to like the conference, it's either like the tournament semifinal or the final in the Big 12.
Yeah, I mean they got the Texas Tech game like you already said. That's massive. They really need to win out, and if they don't win out, I don't think they're going to get in.
Let's look at this. Texas Tech has not lost at home this entire season. It is very difficult to go into Lubbock and win. Oklahoma's going to need Porter Moser's gang is going to have to find something.
Well, and I mean historically, Texas Tech's never been an easy place to play. So that's that again. That the writing I think is on the wall for Oklahoma.
Exactly. That's a long bus trip. Wherever you're coming from in the Big 12. Let's move on to our next conference. We got the Big East here. Big East, another strong year. Again, I think they're looking in like that 4-7 range. They have a decent depth that we necessarily kind of haven't seen from them like the past couple years. Like they've kind of been like a 3-4 bid league the past couple years, but I think they have a chance to get 7 teams in. The 4 that are definite, we have Providence, Villanova, UConn, and then I'm going to call it 5. Providence, Villanova, UConn, Marquette, and Xavier, I think, are pretty much locked on to the bubble. I think Villanova has, they picked up a big win against Providence last week. They have another game against Providence as well as a game at UConn tomorrow. I think Villanova wins those 2 games and wins the Big East tournament. I think Villanova has a chance to be a 1 seed in the in March Madness. The two teams on the bubble, I think you have Creighton and Seton Hall. Creighton projected right now as the last team in the tournament. Seton Hall, a 8 seed, which is, I guess, further off the bubble than I thought. But the Big East has had some, very entertaining basketball this year. Ed Cooley's squad at Providence, 22-3 on the year. Their only losses, a bad loss to Virginia, a blowout to Marquette, and then a overtime loss to Villanova. But you're looking at a Providence team that has a win at Wisconsin, a win versus Texas Tech, a win versus Vermont, who we're going to be talking about towards the end of the show. They're getting some really good scoring. They have some really good depth options as well. They've had, Al-Jalai Durham transfer in from IU, Nate Watson averaging 14 points a game for them. I really like this Providence team, and I really think Ed Cooley has something going for him. And I'm going to be very interested to see the rematch between them and Villanova on March 1st. I think that's going to be a must-watch game here as we head into the last couple weeks.
Yeah, you factor that in, and I watched Providence this weekend. Butler had them dead to rights, up 19 late in the second half, and they came back and won in overtime in Hinkle Fieldhouse. Not an easy place to get a win, especially like that. Another team that I think is close, on the bubble, and they need some help. Would be St. John's. I think everybody else is pretty solidly either on the bubble or in. But I think St. John's, they would definitely need to pick up, probably win out the rest of the year and then pick up a win in the Big Ten or the Big East tournament. My bad.
Yeah, well, they have 4 games left in their schedule. They have Creighton at DePaul, Xavier, and at Marquette. So
yeah, I think if they can go 3-1,
find a way to win at home against Creighton and Xavier, and then knock off Marquette on the road, maybe get 2 wins out of those 3 games, and then as long as you avoid slipping up at DePaul, that's a team with a favorable tournament run that you're right could definitely get a look here going into the tournament.
Yeah, and poor Georgetown, losers of 16 in a row. When was the last time we could say Georgetown was this bad? I mean, it's been.
They did win. They were shock winners of the Big East tournament last year. But yeah, you're right. Georgetown is a program that has struggled, really since John Thompson retired.
Yeah, and Georgetown right now is kind of doing what Butler has been doing recently, and that they, I think they've bitten off more than they can chew. Obviously Georgetown's always been, I think, in the Big East, but the issue is they are, I think, playing up standards when they need to be playing at their standards right now.
Yeah, Georgetown basketball kind of reminds me of is kind of in the same position that Nebraska football is in. And
I like that comparison. Here's another.
You have a lot of national media guys. You have a lot of media man, why isn't Georgetown better? But then you're not remembered. Oh, this isn't the 80s or the 90s anymore.
Well, and I mean, Georgetown, even when I was, a youngling, the last 20 years, has also had good teams. But here's the thing here's the best comparison I think I have for Georgetown is they are like the Minnesota Twins of college basketball.
Yeah, I mean, they made the Final Four in 2007. They have not been to the Sweet 16 since.
Did they lose one year? I think they were in the 215 and lost Florida Gulf Coast pretty bad.
Yes, they were the team. They were the team that got upset by Dunk City.
Yeah, so that's also part of the reason why I remember.
Probably one of the most entertaining games I have ever watched. Period. Was Florida Gulf Coast winning that game.
That and the UMBC dismantling Virginia's
I
defense.
distinctly remember the restaurant I was at
I was on a bus.
watching that game.
I was on a bus back from like Indiana State music competition, and we were laughing our ass off watching this like no name team like dismantle Georgetown. It's really awesome. But yeah, I think the Big East is pretty set. I think, at most they're going to get 7 or 8 teams. Eight's really pushing it. I think at most they're going to get 7.
Yeah, I think 7. If they could get 7, that would be a success. I think that's probably where we're going to be, unless like Creighton, Creighton or Marquette, or Seton Hall fall apart.
Yeah, and I think it would take a miracle run from like Butler to Paul really to even entertain an 8th team, or St. John's even. But yeah, I think the Big East. I think again Providence. I think is actually the team to beat here. Villanova, they've looked sketchy in some of these games they've played recently. A little shaky here and there. And then UConn also, you can never count them out of anything, it seems, except in football. So, it's just like...
Yeah, and this is a UConn team that, to begin the year, they won a double overtime game at or against Auburn. No, that was on a neutral site, who Auburn will talk about, I think.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Probably like the second favorite to win the damn thing. They have some okay wins. They do have a bad loss against West Virginia.
But even that, I wouldn't even consider that a bad loss. That's.
They've won 4 out of their last 5, but they have a chance to get a couple more decent wins here. Go into the schedule, and I think UConn, kind of like Michigan State,
tournament time, man.
Always dangerous in the tournament, and they're 18th in KenPom, one of the more balanced teams, 27 offense, 25 defense. Definitely a team to look out for.
Yeah, I think it's time we move to the Big Ten. I just want to get the monkey off my back. Somebody in Indiana placed a $50,000 bet today on Purdue to win the national title on FanDuel. If it hits, if Purdue wins the national title, that customer is going to win like $650,000. So maybe they know something we don't, but that's a lot of money, a lot of faith in a team that really has.
Yeah, let's talk about Purdue a little bit. I still think Purdue is the best team in the Big Ten. The one thing about Purdue, though, they are 13th in KenPom, and that is because they are the strongest adjusted offensive efficiency team in the country. They are 115th in defense. And you're dealing with a team that cannot play two of its best 3 players on the floor at the same time. Is the time-sharing agreement between Zach Edey and Trevion Williams going to cost them in the tournament, Zach?
I don't think so. I mean, here's the deal with Purdue. They are really good at being a finesse team. They are never going to beat you by getting physical. And that's kind of as we've seen, the way to beat a lot of these upper tier teams other than Auburn is if you get really physical with them, you get their bigs in foul trouble early. They tend to really struggle to generate offense. Now, obviously, Purdue has, who many people are comparing to John Morant and Jaden Ivey. And I think that's a fair comparison. He's super.
Exactly. They have Zach Edey, who could, I think, provide him versus like somebody like Walker Kessler, very entertaining. They have probably the most dynamic big man in the country in Trevion Williams, who can really do it all. And then they have something very important. They have a, somewhat, the percentage may not.
They've got like 3 guys who shoot
They
70% from three.
Exactly, and they have a couple knockdown 3-point shooters, whether that's Sasha Stefanovic or Mason Gillis or Eric Hunter.
Even Jay Nivey can shoot. He's
Exactly.
he's kind of sagged off a little bit here recently, but I mean,
I know he hasn't been playing a whole lot. He's kind of been in Painter's doghouse, but like Brandon Newman is really good defensively. Purdue, I think, really the cream of the crop of a Big Ten conference that could get upwards of 9 teams in the tournament, depending on where some of these bubble teams kind of end their season. And I know I'm watching one of them now. IU currently down 5 to Ohio State with about a minute and a half left in the first half. Indiana, I think, really needs that win. But we go down to the Big Ten. I think that there are 7 teams that I think have really secured their place. Purdue, obviously, you have Illinois, Wisconsin, Ohio State, Rutgers, Michigan State, and Iowa, with the 2 teams on the bubble. And if you're going to look at if the first 2 teams that I think come to mind when I think of a bubble this year, Michigan and Indiana.
Yeah, and it's crazy. We talked about Rutgers last week on the podcast and how much I have this love affair for Rutgers and how hard they play. I am amazed, how many people still say Rutgers should be out when they are 10-6, and I would argue one of the deepest conferences, in America. You're talking about 1 through 9 is tournament teams, and then you still have to go to College Park in Maryland. You still have to go to Minnesota. Minnesota's never been an easy place for anybody in the Big Ten to play. That
like Penn State, is tough to play. At Northwestern 8-6 at home. It's tough to go up to Evanston and play.
Obviously Nebraska's kind of a walk in the park for a lot of these teams. They just don't have the depth as some of these others. But I really think if you look at the top 4 in the standings, you look at Purdue, Wisconsin, Illinois, and Rutgers, one of the things that stands out over other conferences is the amount of players that are capable on those rosters. Yeah. And I think this even extends down to Ohio State and Michigan State as well, to a lesser extent. But, Purdue has a 1 through 11 of all of these guys could play meaningful minutes on a Division I roster. Wisconsin has always been a team that divide and conquers no matter.
Exactly. And then you have a 21 point a game scorer like Johnny Davis playing in Wisconsin systems. Good night. You have, the Illinois can beat you a few different ways. Kofi Coburn, potential National Player of the Year. They're getting, 15 points a game out of Alfonso Plummer, Trent Frazier, Andre Corbello, Jacob Grandison, all providing really good guard play for Illinois. Even a team like Rutgers, Ron Harper Jr. has probably been the X factor in the Big Ten this year.
Do you remember the text I sent you the other day where I said Ron Harper Jr. is the next Malcolm Brogdon? I have a feeling Ron Harper Jr. is going to go 50th in this draft, or 40 to 50th, and he's he's going to be a starter in his second year, just because he's really gritty. He plays stunning defense, but also, he's just a guy who can get you a bucket when you need him to.
He is probably the guy to go and get you a bucket in the Big Ten this year.
Yeah, he's been really good. Obviously, highlighted, I think, by them knocking off the number 1 team Purdue off his massive half-court 3. I like where the Big Ten stands. I think 8 is probably the number that they're going to end up with. I think one of Michigan.
I think it's going to be one of It's going to be 7 or 8. I think it's going to be either one of Michigan or Indiana, or they're going to find, or like both of those teams are going to be playing in the NIT this year, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it really sucks because I think Indiana started off really hot, but they kind of hit a wall here. Trace Jackson Davis have struggled a little bit.
Yeah,
And
he has been him and Race Thompson have been kind of cold recently. After Trace Jackson Davis had his 40-point game against who was that? But he set the Assembly Hall record, earlier this year. Indiana has lost their last four.
now
You know,
is Finney is don't they have a couple of injuries too of guys who might come back later this season?
yeah, like Rob Finney has been beat up a lot of the year. So obviously they had that disciplinary scenario against Northwestern. That's a game that they really should have won.
Yeah, that was a game they blew. Let's not call it what
Yeah.
it is.
I mean, but you're talking about, a guy in Trace Jackson Davis who he went and he got 30 in that loss in their last game that lost to Wisconsin. But if you look at the 3 games he had coming into that and their losses, 3 for 9 against Illinois, 4 for 13 against Northwestern, 5 for 13 against Michigan State. Obviously he only played 11 minutes again in that win against Purdue. So it's like this is an Indiana team that can win without him producing. But this is a guy who was a preseason All-American. They're going to need him to step it up down the stretch as they go into halftime down 5 against Ohio State in Columbus. One of the other things I really wanted to talk about in the Big Ten real quick was you are going to be tempted to put Michigan State deep in this tournament because Tom Izzo is the master of March. I'm telling you now, don't do that. I do not think this Michigan State team has
They don't have a guy.
I don't think they have the depth. They don't have the guy to really make another deep run. If we look at bracketology at the moment, if you look at where Lenardi has them as a 5 seed, if they end up as a 5 seed, I'm probably going to pick that 5-12 upset.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Again, this is a team. They have Gabe Brown, who has been playing really well this year. The senior leader for them, averaging 12 points a game. But then you have, Malik Hall, Max Christie, Marcus Bingham, Joey Hauser. There's not really that number 2 guy. They are 1-4 in their last 5. I do worry about them coming down the stretch. They have a game at Iowa. They play Purdue. They have a game at Michigan, at Ohio State. This could be a tough stretch for them, even as they are ranked 27th in KenPom. But nothing about Michigan State really just kind of knocks you back or like really makes you look, makes you take a second look at this team.
Yeah, it's funny though. There was a Michigan State team that was like that. Oh, I don't know, 8-9 years ago that ended up making the Final Four, if I remember correctly. So I think again it's going to come down to can Izzo have another Magic March run, and I think he's perfectly capable of. But I think it's time we move on to the Pac-12 here.
Yes, let's do. Pac-12, probably the most top-heavy major power conference. I think you're looking at a Pac-12 conference that has been down historically, but you're looking at a Pac-12 conference that had USC. It really felt like it had an Elite 8 run last year, where they really gave it their all to make it there. You have a UCLA team who obviously made the Final Four last year. And
Let's not forget Oregon State, man. Oregon State.
Yeah, Oregon State, made that deep run.
I want to
They
start
won the
there.
Pac-12 tournament, and then they knocked off Tennessee, Oklahoma State, Loyola Chicago, and really almost knocked off Houston to get to the Final Four. Not as good this year. They're sitting at 1-14, 3-22 overall. But between USC and UCLA, and then really who I consider a dark horse national championship threat, the Arizona Wildcats. I think those are going to be your three locks for the NCAA tournament. And then I wouldn't count out Oregon. They have a chance to pick up some really good wins. They host UCLA. They host USC. I think Oregon could potentially sneak in, and maybe even Colorado, depending on how if Colorado can get a win against Arizona, and then maybe knock a team off a team or two in the Pac-12 tournament. This is a conference that I love watching, not just because I'm a huge Bill Walton fan, but this is a conference that I do think is on the upswing. Tommy Lloyd, probably National Coach of the Year at Arizona. Coming out of the assistant job at Gonzaga, they are 24-2. Their only losses at Tennessee in a 4-point game, at UCLA. Hard to play in Pauley Pavilion. They have a lottery pick in Benedict Maturin. They are getting some really good. They are a really good team, and this is a team I think dark horse, depending on how their their region breaks. I think they are probably going to be a 1 seed here at the end of the day, and I do think they are a Final Four national championship contending team.
Yeah, and really, to me, I think, as you said, this not only really top heavy. I think all three of these teams are Elite Eight threats. UCLA, of course, there's Johnny Juzang, who's been there, done that. He's hit the big shots. USC just plays really sound team basketball. And I really like the way they've been playing here recently. And then, of course, Arizona has kind of been, I would say, flown under the radar as a 24-2 team, which is crazy because I think they're number 2 in the men's polls right now. But I think people are just not realizing how good Arizona has been this year.
Exactly. This is we were unfortunately, with Arizona, we were robbed of that Gonzaga matchup that should have happened. That was, I believe, planned. But you look at Arizona; they have wins against Michigan. They have a 30-point win against Wyoming. They beat Illinois. They do have a win against UCLA. They do have a win against USC. They do have a win against Oregon. They did go, blow out, obviously, Oregon State, not as good this year, but they have wins against Colorado. And they are a team that has gone into the Pac-12 and really succeeded this year. And like I said, I really, really believe this is a team that's going to go very far in the tournament. Same with UCLA. I think they're very good as well. Mick Cronin has that team playing really well. UCLA is very deep, and I think they are, again, another threat to make another deep run. And just what you're right, USC, Andy Enfield has a really good team. They have wins against at San Diego State. They are, they haven't been blown out. Obviously, they struggle against Stanford for whatever reason. But they have, really good players in Isaiah Mobley and Boogie Ellis. Drew Peterson, almost had a 35-point game against USC. He has, he almost like fucked around and got a triple double, or basically. So that's another team. I think they're built to make another deep run.
Yeah, and the last team I want to hit on is the Oregon Ducks. I don't understand this team. Their out of conference schedule is crazy. They beat SMU one day, then they lose by 32 to BYU. They lose by 29 to Houston at home. They've lost to Arizona State and Stanford. But then they've made it a game against Baylor, and they've beat USC on the road and UCLA on the road. I really don't understand them. They're gonna have to win, I would say, 3 out of the next 4.
Yeah, I don't think they can afford to drop either that Washington or Washington State game.
Yeah, and those are not easy places
I do think
to play.
they are going to have to beat one of UCLA or USC.
Yeah,
I think they're another team. You lump them in with Indiana and Michigan as your really solid bubble teams.
I actually put them more with St. John's just because of the inconsistency. That inconsistency, getting blown out twice by Arizona State is not what you want to see out of a team, making the tournament. So
Yeah.
I would put them right in that St. John's tier of you need a lot of work. If you can win 3 out of 4, you're knocking on the door of the bubble. And a couple wins in your tournament just erases all that.
Numbers aren't really on their side either. Currently 70 seconds.
Yeah.
10 palm. 63rd in net, a little bit better, but they have a couple quad 1 wins. But it's going to be, you're right, Oregon probably needs a conference tournament run, probably one or, again, like I said, I think they need to beat one of UCLA or USC, and then they probably need to score a knockout win against one of those 3 teams in the conference tournament at some point. That finishes up the Pac-12, so we're now on to our last major conference, the SEC. Again, very top-heavy. Very deep team. I do think the SEC at one point probably was on pace to get 10 or 11 teams into the tournament. I think the top half of the SEC has really pulled away from the bottom half. And as we go down the list, Auburn, number 3 team in the country right now, have been number 1. They have the triple-double machine in Walker Kessler. They have who I think is going to be the number 1 pick in Jabari Smith. So you're looking at them as a national championship candidate. You have Kentucky, who is probably a Final Four national championship contender as well, with Oscar Tshiebwe, who is averaging 16 points and 16 rebounds a game. Which you love to see. You have then kind of the next tier of the SEC, Arkansas, Tennessee, Alabama. Alabama has been a little up and down this year, but I do think they are capable of really beating anybody in the country. It just kind of needs to be their night. And then you think probably the last team that's probably solidly in the tournament with LSU. And then I look at their bubble, Florida, who did get a very big win against Auburn. That's certainly helping them. They have a game against Arkansas tomorrow, a chance to get another one. And I think if they win that Arkansas game, they're probably in. And then a team that is probably more on the outside of the bubble, Mississippi State, who I do think is on the outside looking in, but does have a chance. And then teams that are out, but I think you have to look out for in the tournament. South Carolina has been under the radar. They are 7-7 in the SEC right now, which is pretty impressive. They have a chance to win against Alabama and Auburn, maybe go get a road win. And then Texas A&M, who, started really hot to begin the year. They had wins. They have a win against Notre Dame. They had a close loss to Wisconsin, a close loss to TCU, and then, started their non-conference schedule with a win against Arkansas before losing 8 in a row. But a decent team who I think, it definitely deserves a mention.
So you kind of already mentioned this. Jabari Smith should be consensus number one player in this draft. He just does it all, man. He's a really good defender. He's got Auburn playing well, and the thing with Auburn is, both their losses have came here recently.
Yep.
Both of them have kind of been these like heartbreak type games, man. I buy them. This Florida game they really shouldn't have lost, but it's the SEC. Anybody can beat anybody, and again, their two losses are in conference or just Arkansas on the road, tough place to play, and then of course in the swamp in Florida. Another really horrible place to play, honestly. Ty Washington and Kentucky, 22-5. I like where they're at. My big question is, what do you think is going to happen with teams like, South Carolina and Mississippi State and even Florida to an extent, where they're like, I think Florida's probably the closest out of all those to get in.
Yeah.
But Texas A&M having the the minus conference record, I'm not a big fan of that, of course. But you have South Carolina there, you have Mississippi State right there, both at 16-10, 16-11. I think it's close. I think
I think Mississippi State probably more so than South Carolina, has a chance. They play each other on Wednesday at South Carolina. That's probably going to be the decider for that SEC bubble spot. But Mississippi State, they have some decent. They have a win against Arkansas. They have a win against Alabama. So they had some single digit losses at Kentucky, at LSU, at Alabama, at Tennessee. Mississippi State plays everybody tough. It just kind of skimming over their schedule. It looks like they have only had one game inside the SEC decided by more than, or two games inside the SEC decided by more than 10 points, and those were wins against South Carolina and Ole Miss. So I'd look out for Mississippi State. They're going to be playing very tough down the stretch here, and if they can knock off South Carolina at home, I think you probably put Mississippi State really, really on the bubble, and kind of let them go from there. But yeah, like I'm saying, like Auburn, national championship contender, Kentucky, national championship contender. I think Arkansas, Tennessee, Alabama can beat anybody they go up against on the right day. I think the SEC probably, depending on where the brackets break, I mean, that's a conference that could probably get 4 or 5 teams in the Sweet 16, depending on who gets hot.
Yeah, and I actually want to conclude our SEC talk with how soon after the season does Tom Crean get the axe in Georgia? If not already.
When is their last game? So their last game is March 5th at Missouri at 2:30 p.m. Central.
I mean, you still got to fact. He'll probably coach
I think Tom Crean will be fired within 24 hours of them getting back to Athens after that game.
I think he'll play. I think he'll coach in their SEC conference, their conference championship game. But other than that,
yeah,
he's done a really bad job down at Georgia, and then again he had another.
And it's kind of thing because Tom Crean is always going to be a really good recruiter. He was able to get Anthony Edwards, somebody else to kind of hang on his recruiting hat. With
he said three number one picks from 3 schools, right? Isn't that what I remember hearing? If I'm not mistaken, he had he had like Dwayne Wade at Marquette. He had Anthony Edwards, and then like top 3 or top 5 maybe.
Depot and
Depot.
Zeller. Yeah. So he can recruit with the best of them. I don't know what the future holds for Tom Crean.
Hey, you know what, man?
I think a major, like one of these next few conferences we're about to go through, a major or mid-major conference is going to take a run at him, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him kind of bounce back in that position. I think the SEC has just been really, really tough the past couple of years.
I think one of the teams that might have another coach on their hot seat is the Butler Bulldogs. I don't think it's right. I think they should keep their guy. He's been pretty good. But, that's a team where if Tom Crean was available because he got canned, I could see Butler taking a run at him because we saw his, magic with a mid-major school like Marquette. Now, obviously, bigger stage, but Tom Crean had success at Indiana.
He's got a lot of roots. The man can recruit Indiana.
Yeah, he's done it well in the past, and I think if Butler fires their guy, I don't think they should, but if they were to fire their coach, Tom Crean would make a lot of sense. I just with the incident bashing his players and assistants openly. The Wade Mason incident early this season, I think that there's a good chance he gets canned. I think he should have probably already been fired this season, but Georgia doesn't want to pay severance for somebody not coaching. So
yeah. Well, it's not like Georgia. It's not like their athletic program doesn't have some money right now. So
yeah, they do have all their money from Indianapolis.
Yep.
Let's go ahead. We're going to take a break, tell you about one of our beautiful sponsors, and we'll be right back after this.
This podcast is sponsored in part by Fanatics. Fanatics offers the broadest assortment of fan merchandise and memorabilia worldwide from all your favorite leagues and sports, not just the NBA and NCAA like we talk about here, but also the NFL. And I'm in the market for some new Packers gear myself, and with Fanatics selection, I can choose between jerseys, t-shirts, and sweatshirts, even face masks, tailgating equipment, and stuff for my pets. And I'm leaning towards getting a nice sweatshirt myself. You can also shop MLB, NHL, NASCAR, and all your favorite soccer leagues around the globe. Order now and get free U.S. shipping on any and all orders over $29 using code 29SHIP. Again, that's 29SHIP 29SHIP. And now, back to the podcast.
Welcome back. It's time to talk mid-majors, right? We're
mid-majors. We got a good starting point. I'm going to start with the major conferences. These are the conferences that you would think would get, in that 2 to 3 bid range. First is the A10, who I think, unfortunately, has to be up there with the ACC in terms of most disappointing conference. The A10, I think, is pretty solidly a one-bid league this year, and that's including Davidson sitting at 22-4. St. Bonaventure came into the season ranked in the top 20. There was some hype around Dayton, VCU, Richmond. None of those teams have really been all that good this year. And I do think, unfortunately, I'm Davidson, unless they kind of lose in their conference title game to like a VCU or a Dayton, I think Davidson's probably on the outside looking in of the NCAA tournament. I think they may need to win the A10 because even now at 22-4, they are basically sitting as a 12 seed in the tournament.
Wow. This year kind of reminds me a lot of the year that Evansville went 29-5 and lost in the Valley Finals to, last second heave from Northern Iowa. In that a lot of conferences are so balanced that a lot of the at-large bids are going to be eaten up by teams that lose in their conference semis and stuff like that. So there's so many bubble teams that we've kind of talked about. here's one of the things, for me at least, that I always think about when I'm thinking about the Atlantic 10 is that their conference tournament is a everybody can beat everybody type of event. It doesn't matter how good you've been historically against a team or that season. It's a very there's 6 teams there where it's an absolute brawl for the only guaranteed bid. I know you kind of said you're down on the Spiders a little bit in Richmond. VCU's been pretty consistent this year. Dayton's been, I think Dayton's been a weird team. They've had some injury issues. COVID caught them at a really bad time, and then Davidson really started out the gates pretty hot, but they kind of fell apart here recently.
Yeah, the 2 conference losses at home to VCU, not the best, even though it's just a 2-point loss, and then at Rhode Island. Again, it's hard to win on the road in college basketball, but you would think Davidson would be able to go in and beat the Rams and take care of some business. Really, Davidson's problem is their defense. They have allowed some high-scoring games. They are a team that is going to just try and outrun you, try and play the game in the 80s. But that means their opponent is going to play the game in the 70s. And if the offense isn't there, which it normally has been, they are 12th in adjusted efficiency, but 192nd in adjusted defense. So
here's my thing with Davidson. I've watched a couple of their games. They've been on ESPN Plus. I think that they have a really awkward draw here. There's a couple of these bottom tier teams, like Rhode Island and Fordham, that have really good defenses, specifically zone, which is something that Davidson has really struggled against this season. I would be interested in looking at how Davidson's going to do against some of these more defensive-minded teams like your St. Louis, like VCU. St. Bonaventure is similar to Davidson, is that they kind of want to get out and run a little bit. And then Dayton, I really don't know how to describe Dayton's style of play. They're kind of inconsistent as well. So I would be interested to see, if maybe, let's say Davidson wins out, loses in the finals to Dayton or VCU. It's a close game. Maybe they can get 2 bids, but I think I'm inclined to agree with you that they're a 1-bid league this year.
Yeah, I think they'd probably be looking at a last 4 in type situation if that's the case. Like I said, they probably need to impress some people down the stretch here. Next is what I think could be another 1-bid league. Kind of this to the surprise of maybe a lot of people is the American. Houston, obviously coming off of that Final Four run last year, they had a bit of a tough stretch, and I think they let a couple teams onto the bubble in SMU and Houston. But again, they had an amazing, really hyped game. They lost at the wire to Alabama. They have a 2-point loss to Wisconsin, but they have a 20-point win against Virginia. They have wins against Oklahoma State. They have really, outside of those SMU and Memphis games, have really looked really good in the American. And this is all without, I think their best player in Marcus Sasser, who was injured earlier in the year. So this is a Houston team that has been impressive. I'm not entirely sure if they're capable of making another deep run, But if you're going to talk about the bubble teams, you have SMU and Memphis, who I do think have outside chances to get in. SMU, they had a 16-point win against Memphis. They have a chance to go and play at Houston. They have a chance to pick up, I think, a decent win against Cincinnati. And then, you look at a Memphis team coached by Penny Hardaway. They obviously were extremely hyped coming into the year. They had a win against St. Louis. They had a win against Western Kentucky, who had been good, a win against Virginia Tech. And then the losses started piling up. They had a 4-game skid, losing to Iowa State, losing to Georgia, losing to Ole Miss, losing to Murray State. And their 9-5 conference record with losses, to East Carolina and UCF and Tulane have not really been helping them all that much.
Well, and you kind of mentioned it there. That loss against Murray State, at least right now, doesn't look super bad on paper.
Yeah.
My biggest thing with this conference is I miss the old Wichita State teams, man. I really miss the Shocker Nation showing up and ruining people's day. I hate Kelvin Sampson with the fiery passions of hell. But he has done a lot of good for Houston. It's only a matter of time probably before he gets caught, with recruiting issues again. But, I will say this, SMU, I would say I would put SMU in right now. But I could see arguments for why you wouldn't. And another team I kind of want to throw on the bubble here, and it's only because I think they have the chance to win out, and maybe lose to Houston, the conference tourney, is UCF. They had some COVID issues. They've had some really weird games where they've had players get hurt and then come back the next game, things like that. So I'm just
they
weird.
do have a win against Miami, which it was at the beginning of the year, but that is an important. Those wins matter. Whenever, and you're right. They certainly have a chance. Yeah, and they also beat Michigan too.
Yeah, they've got a decent out of conference schedule, and they're one of those teams where I would give them kind of a second look. Like if I have, if I've filled out a bracket and I've got 58 teams filled in, what do I do with the last 10 spots? I would take a look at UCF, especially if, like I said, if they can win 3 of their last 4 and then maybe get to the finals in their conference tournament. I think it would be really hard to keep UCF off this bracket just with
definitely a chance to play themselves into a bubble spot, because I do think we kind of talked about it. The bubble is really,
it's pretty open.
It's open, and yet it's there's really only 4 or 5 teams on the bubble. And if Indiana is still sitting, in the next bracketology with a sitting on the 11 line or the 12 line in the next bracketology, even though they've lost 5 games in a row. I think that speaks to where the bubble really is. And I do think there is a team in the American that can play themselves into the tournament, whether that is SMU or Memphis or UCF.
Yeah, like you kind of said, I think it's a one bid team or one big conference, but I could see as many as 3. I don't think it'd exceed that. SMU had, I think SMU is the closest to being locked in. But like I said, I think UCF would deserve a nod over Memphis, Tulane and Temple, and then of course Cincinnati.
Memphis and SMU still have to play Houston, and that is a chance for both of those teams to get a really marquee win.
What happens to Houston if they lose both of those games too?
Houston's in.
No, I know they're in, but what I'm saying is does Houston? I think right now they're 4 or 5 seed. Does Houston drop to 7 Does they?
Yeah, I would say, if Houston loses those two games and then they don't necessarily have the best conference tournament, I could see them being bumped. I mean, they're on the 5 line right now. I could see them being bumped to like a 6 or a 7 for
Yeah, could
sure.
you imagine being the 2 seed with Houston as your 7 seed and your?
I wouldn't like it.
I'd be
Um,
so
if we're
pissed.
talking about potential 7 seeds with a chance to ruin your day, may I introduce you to the Mountain West Conference?
Yeah, this is
Um,
one of the conferences that I think has been like way too under the radar. Like no one's talking about them. A lot of the mid-major love has been coming in the form of like your schools like Loyola, who always gets hugs and kisses from the committee. Drake and Missouri State out of the Valley.
Yeah, the
Um,
A10, which is which what is down this year.
And then, of
The
course, you can't throw out Murray State and Belmont. I think both of those teams have been, exceptional this year.
exactly. We're going to be talking about those two later. But if you're looking at a 7, 8, 9, 10 seed who's going to ruin a top seed's day, and I'm gonna predict it now. One of the Mountain West team, the Mountain West is going to have a team in the Sweet 16 this year.
They,
I
they,
think
they've got 3 teams who I think should get in.
Yes,
Right?
they have 3 locks in Wyoming, Boise State, and Colorado State. I think San Diego State has a chance to play itself in as well. San Diego State, winners of their last 5, and they have a chance. Now, they're 2 road games, but they do still play Boise State and Wyoming. Um, they don't necessarily, San Diego State, they have a win against St. Mary's. Um, don't necessarily have anything really else on their non-conference, their non-conference resume. But the fact that the Mountain West has been so good this year, I think is a boost for them. And you're talking at Mountain West teams: Boise State 21-6, Wyoming 22-4, Colorado State 21-4. Wyoming has wins against. They have again, not necessarily an incredible non-conference resume, but they do have a win against Northern Iowa, a close loss at Stanford. They beat Grand Canyon, who was in the tournament last year. They went to Washington and won. This is a team, Wyoming. Graham Ike has been really, really good. He has scored 25 points or more in his last 4 games. I think he is a really good shot to win the Mountain West Player of the Year for Wyoming. And you really can't cut out Boise State or Colorado State. Both of them have been, all 3 of these teams have been flirting with the top 25. And I think all 3 of those teams are going to be in the tournament. And like I said, one of those teams is going to knock a 1 or a 2 seed out in the second round, if I had to bet right now. I don't know who that is, but I'm going to bet on one of them.
Here's the other interesting thing here is, Wyoming's in a weird spot where no one's really talking about them, but they're 22-4. They've been just a very consistent team. 11-2 in their conference. 846.
Are coming off a loss, a kind of a tough loss at New Mexico, but they do have an opportunity to really make up for it going to Colorado State, and chancing to get in. And we're talking about the Mountain West. Colorado State, San Diego State, Wyoming are all in the. I think all 4 actually in Boise State too are all in the top 30 or top 38 when it comes to net, and they look really good in terms of KenPom as well. They're all within the top 50 in KenPom.
Yeah, here's another weird thing with this conference. UNLV historically has dominated, but I think their reign of obviously it's not the 90s anymore. It's no longer UNLV shows to run.
Yeah, and UNLV, Fresno State, Nevada are not, and Utah State. None of those teams are really bad teams either.
Yeah, any one of those teams I think could still pull an upset, get an upset bid in where they, where they could easily. I don't know if they could easily win their conference tournament, but I do think one of those four teams could easily just make people's days upset and steal another bid away from some of these people in the bubble. But
Yep.
I,
The last mid-major that we want to talk about, and again, out west, and we've talked about them a lot. Kind of been, I would really call it like the story of college basketball this year is the West Coast Conference. Historically, it's been Gonzaga and friends. St. Mary's has been good. BYU has been good the last couple of years. But if we're talking about a run, let's talk about San Francisco, who has really been playing really well the past 2 years. They have San Francisco. Let me go through their non-conference schedule. They have a win against Davidson. They have a win against Towson, who is a really good team in the Colonial. They have a win against UAB. They have wins against UNLV and Fresno State. They have a win against Arizona State. And we have to give them credit for scheduling Loyola Chicago mid-season to try and continue to, boost that non-conference resume. Now, San Francisco, they have struggled a bit in conference against the top of the West Coast, being Gonzaga and St. Mary's. They did split with BYU, but I do think this is a San Francisco team where the West Coast Conference tournament is really weird in that the top two seeds get like a bye all the way to the semifinals, and then you kind of have 3 and 4 in the quarterfinals. It's kind of a wacky setup, but San Francisco, they have a chance to. Let me start that again. My audio kicked in. It's a bit of a whack. San Francisco, they have a chance to pick up another win. If they look good against Gonzaga, they've looked really good against St. Mary's. If they could knock off St. Mary's or BYU again in the conference tournament, I do think that will put San Francisco into the tournament kind of safely. Right now, they are an 11 seed. They are one of the teams with the last 4 byes. I think that should hold as long as they don't slip up against Pacific or San Diego. They already have a slip up against Portland. But really, I think the team that's outside, the other team that's on the bubble on the West Coast is BYU. BYU currently first 4 out at the moment, and BYU, they're actually currently sitting 5th in conference behind Santa Clara. But this is a BYU team that has lost to Santa Clara. They lost to Pacific. They did get a win against St. Mary's, which is important. But they really need to avoid. I think BYU, if they lose to a team that's not Gonzaga or St. Mary's, I think BYU could be in trouble. Looking at the NCAA tournament.
Here's a interesting thing. I know you said they have a slip up against Portland. Portland's won 5 in a row. They've kind of got a lot of momentum building here. I don't think Portland will make the tournament by any stretch, but I do think they're going to make NIT or CIT people pretty pissed off to have to play against.
Oh well, yeah. There's a lot like. That's the thing. If San Francisco and BYU don't get in, I think both of those teams you could probably consider them to be like NIT favorites, almost.
Yeah, but I will say with the Dons, I've been a big fan of theirs since I watched them play against Virginia just a couple of years ago on ESPN2 and beat them pretty easily. The coach, I think, is like 7 years old. He's super young, and I find that fascinating, bringing more young minds to basketball. When college basketball, I think, has traditionally been a pretty experienced coaching kind of sport. Having more young minds in is always big. And again, 21-7. they have another game against Gonzaga. If they can get, Chet Holmgren in foul trouble and Timmy in foul
I think,
trouble.
like I was saying, I think if San Francisco can get a win against St. Mary's or BYU in the conference tournament, and if they look good in that game against Gonzaga, I think San Francisco is in. BYU, I think, probably needs to,
Make some noise.
they definitely need to beat St. Mary's or San Francisco in the conference tournament. I think BYU needs to get to the finals against Gonzaga to kind of have a chance at the moment.
I would be really intrigued with
And
what happens with Gonzaga.
Is this going to be the year for Gonzaga?
I don't think so.
You don't think so? Walker Kessler could probably eat Chet Holmgren's lunch any day he wanted.
I don't think they do well against. They're like Purdue. They don't do very well against very physical teams. And their first loss was against, I think, Alabama, if I'm not mistaken. Sorry, Duke. Their second loss.
Duke and Alabama.
Their second loss against Alabama. I remember Alabama just went right at Holmgren and Timmy early. Got him in foul trouble and played just bully ball the entire game, and it got them so out of sync that they couldn't recover. And Duke did the same thing, but Duke also has 3 first-round picks on their roster, and Alabama has like one guy who might be in the lottery, and like a bunch of second-round, maybe late first-round guys. So I will say this:
is there to beat Gonzaga. I do think they should get to the Final Four again, just depending on how their bracket breaks down.
But here's the thing though with Gonzaga. Do you put them up against teams like Baylor, Kansas, Arizona, USC? They really have to avoid the teams that are physical. If they can't, they are in serious trouble. They could easily see like a 1-8 matchup where
that's what I wanted to bring up, because if you look at like Joe Lunardi's bracketology at the moment, his current 8-9 matchup against Gonzaga would be Wyoming and Murray State. 2 teams.
That's
Murray State, obviously super good. Wyoming, Graham Ike, we talked about him.
If Gonzaga gets that draw, I would be so scared. I understand that they should beat them 10 times out of 10.
Yeah, and even if you look at like Jerry Palm's bracketology, Boise State versus Davidson, I mean, you have to say this is probably the deepest 8-9 field in forever, I feel like these 8-9 games are going to be impossible to figure out. And if Gonzaga has one of those matchups, especially if they have a big man who can go toe to toe with Chet Holmgren, and if they have a way to kind of get in, to shut down Timmy, that's going to be interesting. But I do think Gonzaga should be among the favorites.
Another team that I don't think gets enough buzz here, like as a potential Gonzaga upsetter, is Wisconsin. I think Wisconsin is like a 4 seed, 4 or 5. That's not a matchup.
Like if you were to look at just Joe Lunardi's bracketology for Gonzaga, they have a second round game against Wyoming or Murray State. They would have a potential Sweet 16 matchup against Alabama or Wisconsin, and then you're looking at in the Elite Eight UCLA or Texas Tech. That if you truly want to talk about a national title run, that could potentially be like the best run from any team in Gonzaga, just because that bracket would be stacked.
Yeah, and again, I know why. Another reason why I don't like them winning the national title is like you get these mid-major teams and they get on a heater. You get to those Elite Eight, Final Four, Final Two matchups, and you've already dogfought your way there. Dogfight in the last two spots, as we've seen with Loyola, as we've seen with some schools in the past. Really hard to do.
Yeah.
So
And this is a year. Last year we talked. Last year the feeling was it was Gonzaga and Baylor versus everybody. They got to the national championship. They proved us right. This year, I don't necessarily think we can say that there's one favorite. Even one or two favorites. Like even if you look at if you ask me, Cam, who's going to win the national title this year, I could probably rattle off like 7 or 8 teams.
and you're going to be wrong.
Yeah, Arizona, Auburn, Purdue. Even if you look at the top 25, like Kansas, Kentucky, Duke, Villanova, Texas Tech, Providence can make a deep run. UCLA can make a deep run. Wisconsin can make a deep run. Illinois can make a deep run. Like, ooh, it's truly wide open. And speaking of things that are wide open, we have a couple of conferences that we want to highlight real quick. These are your mid majors. These are the potential bid stealers. First and foremost, we have Loyola Chicago in the Missouri Valley Conference. Loyola Chicago, the Missouri Valley has been pretty good this year, and Loyola Chicago does have 4 conference losses: 2 to Drake, 1 to Bradley, 1 to Missouri State. I do think I don't think Loyola Chicago is really going to fall out of the tournament. They have a game against Evansville. They have a game at Northern Iowa to end the conference season. They're currently beating Illinois State at halftime right now. But that's a team where if they don't get to their conference tournament final, or if they lose their conference tournament to a Northern Iowa, Missouri State, or Drake, that is I think Missouri State and Drake really have a potential to steal a bid, and Loyola State could knock a team like Michigan or Indiana or Mississippi State or BYU, San Francisco off the bubble, because I do think the committee loves Loyola Chicago. They have a win against San Francisco, so you already have the head-to-head. They have 2 close losses against Michigan State and Auburn. They've beaten Arizona State. They have beaten DePaul. They've beaten Vanderbilt. They're probably in, but you do have to. I would say the Missouri Valley. You are going to want to pay attention to that tournament.
Yeah, and I would say right now, if you're going to put money on who's going to win that, I would put the money on Drake. They match up very well against Loyola. They've beaten them twice. I would say it's Drake's conference turning to lose this season.
Ooh, interesting.
I don't buy Northern Iowa, and Missouri State. They always tend to flame out in the conference tournament, but I think Drake has a really good shot at winning that conference overall, just because they match up so well against the top teams.
And they have a really good scorer in Tucker DeVries, a freshman who you're going to be seeing a lot of. I would expect Drake. Obviously they've had some recent tournament history. They have a chance to step up, because we didn't really mention it. Loyola Chicago is leaving for the Atlantic 10 next year.
Man, isn't that awesome? The A10 is going to get even more awesome. I think
that's going to be a rising tide for the A10. So someone's going to have to step up into the Missouri Valley, and that leads us into our next conference, which is the Ohio Valley Conference. This is a 2-team race. You have Murray State and Belmont. Murray State obviously ranked 19th.
They play on Thursday too. They have a game on Thursday at 9 p.m. That will decide which of the two gets in, I think.
Yep. And then, but if we're talking about the Missouri Valley, they're adding Illinois Chicago and they're adding Murray State. So obviously, we probably would have liked to see Murray State, Murray State play Loyola, one for like a year in the Ohio Valley. But Belmont, I think is sitting on the bubble as well. If they could beat Murray State on Thursday, I think it's going to make things really interesting if the two of them get to the conference tournament. Belmont is going to have to beat Morehead State.
They have 3 teams right at the top of the Ohio Valley.
Exactly. Like the Ohio Valley has been very strong, and Belmont and Belmont too is going to be in the Missouri Valley. So we're going to continue to see this Belmont Missouri State dogfight, which will be interesting. Obviously, that's going to clear things up in the Ohio Valley for Morehead State coming here in the future, and then they're also, I believe, like Southern Indiana is if they do decide to move up from Division II, that's a pretty natural landing spot for them. But that Murray State Belmont game is going to be must watch. I think Murray State is probably solidly in the tournament as long as they get to the Ohio Valley Conference Final.
They have too many quality, non-conference wins. I understand Bellarmine can't get in, but that's a tough team there. And Bellarmine they've beat. They have that win over Memphis on the road. That's not an easy place to play, nor an easy team to beat. They played Auburn close early in the season.
Yep.
I like what Murray State's been doing, man.
They've beaten a team who we're going to talk about shortly in Chattanooga. With a team like Murray State, the games that you want to pay attention to are out of conference games against likely conference winners. Chattanooga, we're going to talk about them in a second, is a really good team. Middle Tennessee State is not a bad team out of Conference USA either, who we're going to talk about in a second. Murray State's there. Yeah, Belmont, they need something going for them. They have a win against Drake. They have a win against Iona, who we're going to talk about. They have a win against Chattanooga. But a win against Murray State would really make their resume look very nice, especially against weaker bubble teams from the power conferences and a down A10 and American. The next two-team mid-major I want to talk about is the Mid-American. Toledo and Ohio are, I think, two really strong teams. Toledo has 2 wins against Ohio, but I do think that's kind of the cream of the crop. Both of those teams have 20 wins, and I think that whoever wins that conference tournament, whether it be Toledo, Ohio, that could be potentially a scary 12 or 13 seed for whoever draws them. I'm not sure that I would be too thrilled if I got them in the first round.
Well, and we've seen the MAC show up pretty well in recent tournaments. Buffalo a couple years ago.
Last year, and Toledo has a guy in Ryan Rollins who can go out and get just about any basket he wants.
Yeah. And the other thing with the MAC is coming into the year, we didn't know if Ohio was going to be able to repeat their dominance from last year. That was one of the question marks coming into the season, and they certainly have figured out a way to get back to their kind of glory. 13-3 conference record, 8-15 win percentage at 22-5. But a team that we need to keep an eye on, or 2 teams really, Kent State and Buffalo, both could make runs in the MAC tourney. And I think that, Kent State's won 8 in a row. They kind of had a rough start to the MAC schedule, and their out-of-conference wins aren't very good. But they've won 8 in a row. They've got a lot of momentum. It would not surprise me if they made it all the way to the finals. And, once you get to the finals of a conference tournament, you're playing with house money,
Anything can happen. Last mid-major we want to talk about, again, this is another conference that could potentially have 4 20-win teams. The two I want to focus on in Conference USA, North Texas and UAB, both sitting at 20 wins now. North Texas has a win over Drake. They are 13-1 in their conference. They split the season with UAB. UAB is a team. They have a win against Morehead State. They close loss against South Carolina. Close loss against San Francisco. Close loss to West Virginia. This is another conference. I think much like the MAC, it's gonna be a one-team conference. Ken Palm though is a lot higher on North Texas and UAB. North Texas sitting at 41st. They have a really strong defense. UAB sitting at 49th, top 32 in the country in terms of offensive efficiency. UAB, I would probably pick UAB over North Texas, but this is going to be, whoever wins this conference is going to be a really dangerous 12 seed.
Yeah, not only that, you got to remember North Texas, I think they've won 12 in a row, if I'm not mistaken. And another big thing with North Texas is, their early season struggles are not indicative of what kind of team they are. They lost early to Buffalo. Then, literally, a week and a half later, played Kansas pretty much down to the wire until it came down to them fouling for free throws. They played Miami, Florida down to the wire. They beat Drake on the road. They beat UMass. They beat Wichita State on the road, which isn't what it used to be, but that's still a good, non-conference road win. Obviously, I would honestly give the nod to North Texas, just because I think defensively, they are an elite team, and they kind of play very similar to Virginia has in recent years, where we're going to race to 60, and whoever gets to 60 first will win. But in some of these games, they've been holding opponents to, UTF.
Yeah, if you look at their recent games, they are not allowing more than 60 points.
Yeah.
If you can play really elite defense in March, you're looking very strong.
Right, and I mean, some of these games that they've been winning are not, games that are easy. Western Kentucky on the road, Marshall on the road. Those are kinds of games that, you'll see a lot of, major schools slip up against, just because, you overlook Western Kentucky, which, if you're overlooking the Hilltoppers, you obviously haven't done your research, but, you're overlooking Marshall on the road. Those kinds of games are the ones that you often will see major schools slip up against. You've got to beat those teams if you want to get yourself in, and they've done that. Their last game that I would be slightly nervous about, they just beat UAB on Saturday. There's only one more game that really kind of freaks me out, and that's the Texas-San Antonio game on next Thursday. And the only reason, or 2 Thursdays from now, wow. Only reason why it freaks me out a little bit is Texas-San Antonio always plays spoiler somewhere. They always find a way to pick up a win where they shouldn't. And if I was North Texas, I would take that game very seriously. Not saying they won't, but that is one of those games where just because you dispatched them by 25 last time, that's at home. You're not, playing at their arena is totally different. And one of the things, like I said, late in the year, that's one of those teams I would hate to play if I was in their conference.
Yep. So, Zach, we're going to take one final break. We're going to talk about some other teams to look out for here in March. We're going to talk a few awards. And then wrap things up from there. We will be back in a second. Please. Welcome back, everybody, to our one month away from the tournament college primer. We've given you a shakedown of the power conferences. We've given you a shakedown of the majors and the mid majors. I'm going to tell you, I got 5 teams that you should be looking out for. These are going to be teams that are probably going to be sitting maybe on the 12 seed, probably on the 13 seed. They're going to cause some problems for somebody. The first team that I have is Vermont out of the America East. Vermont has been a pretty strong team out of the America East. They have made it to the 2 or 3 of the past tournaments. They got upset by Hartford last year. They have the one loss against Hartford in the conference tournament. Hartford is a team that purely for financial reasons is going down in D3, but Vermont is a team that you got to look out for. They have a win against Northern Iowa. They have a win against Yale. They are going to provide. They always cause some problems. If you remember their last tournament, like I said, they have been all over the America East recently, and I do think that they can give a 4 seed some serious trouble here in the tournament this year. Their last NCAA tournament appearance, 2019, they played Florida State and only lost by 7 points. So that's a team that you're going to look out for coming off that 13 line.
That's one of those teams where they are, again, just a really physically dominant team. They don't play with a lot of finesse, so they'll turn the ball over, but they're not going to outrun you. They're going to just pound the ball inside, and they kind of play similar to how Purdue plays when Travion Williams is in the game, and how they'll basically go 4 out, get the ball inside, he finds somebody else.
Yeah, they got a big boy inside in Ryan Davis, 6'8", 250 pounds.
Yeah, and he's a rebounding machine. I know what you're thinking, 6'8", really not that big, but I've literally watched him get 4 or 5 offensive rebounds in one possession. Just like, he's one of those players that you should definitely be, watching. And one of those teams you should really be watching. Just kind of watch how they play. If you're a high school coach out there, you want to emulate a way a team plays. Vermont's one of those teams I would be looking at, especially if you have a big guy who is, really good rebounder.
Absolutely. The next team I want to talk about, the number 2 scoring team in the country out of the Summit League, one of the only teams that is undefeated in conference play, and a team that is always a threat to turn a game into a track meet is the South Dakota State Jackrabbits. This is a team, they dropped 88 on Alabama. They've dropped 100 a couple times this season. I do believe they will have to get past Oral Roberts, who obviously made that run last year in the tournament. But their next game against Oral Roberts is on Thursday the 24th. They had a 3-point victory in their first meeting, or a 6-point victory in their first meeting. South Dakota State win against Bradley, a win against Stephen F. Austin, who has been who has been a tournament team. They have a win against Montana State, who I think is going to win the Big Sky.
Not to forget, they beat George Mason at home, lost close to Washington, and they blew out Nevada. Now I know Nevada's having a down year.
Yeah, but this is a team 13th in offensive efficiency. Definitely a team to look out for. Again, they are going to turn their tournament game into a track meet, and if they're on, anything can happen.
They haven't lost since, I believe, December 15th. And one of their wins right before then was at Washington State. Again, another tough place to play. And if you can pick up a win there, you can pretty much hang with anybody.
Exactly. Our third team, I'm kind of got to give it a little bit of a joint shout out. I do think the Colonial is kind of like a 2-horse race between UNC Wilmington and then this team is Tosin. They have a lot of really close losses. Close loss to Pittsburgh, 10-point loss to San Francisco. They do have a win against New Mexico, single-digit loss against Ohio State, win against Kent State. 12-3 in their conference right now. Again, that one loss to they split with UNC Wilmington. But this is a team, they're 44th in offensive efficiency. Again, if they get out of the Colonial, probably looking at like a 13 or a 14 seed. I think that is a game, kind of depending on the matchup where you're going to have to look out for Tosin.
Another team out of the Colonial I really like is Hofstra. I know you didn't mention them there. They've won 6 in a row. One of the things with Hofstra is they've always been really good late in the year. They close out the year. They have Elon at home, William and Mary at home, and then Charleston at home. So 4 straight home games to wrap up the year before they go into the conference tourney. Building that chemistry on your home court before you go into the conference tourney is a big deal.
Yeah, and they're already on a 6-game win streak.
Yeah, that's
a lot of momentum going into a conference tournament.
Yeah. And I mean, they've already beat UNCW. Their game against Tosin was pretty close, but I like how they play.
Averaging, if you average 79 a game, you got a chance against pretty much anybody.
And not only that, they do have, a couple of really strong out-of-conference wins. Early season, they lost to Houston, but then they went and they beat Duquesne pretty handily. They lost a close one to Iona, who I'm sure we're going to talk about in a minute. Lost in College Park to Maryland by 2, but then they pick up a win against Detroit, Princeton, and then a big, and I mean a massive win on the road in Arkansas. Not an easy place to play, as we saw Auburn lose there just a week ago. And beating Monmouth on the road to follow that up. You'd think you might come off a little bit of your high of your season there, but they continued to win that. I like the way they play. We'll see if William and Mary can knock them off again, but I think Hofstra is a team to watch out for too out of that conference.
Our second to last team we're going to be talking about, we've mentioned a few times, they have been on the losing end of a few close games, but Chattanooga, I think is another team to look out for. Close losses against Belmont, close loss at Murray State. They have some, obviously probably not the, I wouldn't necessarily say any true win that they can really hold their hat on outside of a road win at VCU. But they have looked pretty good in the Southern Conference. They have lost their last 2 games. They do have a chance to kind of clean up their schedule. And they do have they have 2 wins against Furman, who is their closest competition in that conference. But that's another team, Lunardi had them at certain points in the year as potentially a 12 seed. So I would keep an eye on them, on what line they end up getting in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, I'm not gonna be. I'm gonna be honest here. I've not watched a lot of SoCon this season, but I will say this: I did watch a game with a friend of mine. We watched the Western Carolina school because he was a graduate there. So shout out to Taylor if he's listening to this 3 hours in. But I will say this: it was really awesome to watch. The Western Carolina team. I think they beat Citadel, if I'm not mistaken. So. 4-12, they're not going to do anything, but that's the only SoCon action I've caught this season.
And then the last team to watch out for from this 13-14 range is going to be Iona, the Fighting Rick Pitino's out of the Metro Athletic Conference. Iona is a team, they made headlines last year. They almost beat Alabama in the tournament. They scheduled Alabama and beat them this year. They have a close loss to Belmont, a close loss to Kansas, a win against Yale. They're sitting at 14-2 in their conference, 22-5 overall. Win against Liberty, a win against Hofstra. This Iona team, You gotta look out for them. They are again going to be they're going to give somebody a headache. And Rick Pitino knows. I know we talked about Michigan State making runs. We've talked about other teams that are good in March. Rick Pitino is very good in March.
Well, yeah, and let's not forget, like, a lot of their losses have been 1 or 2 points other than the Kansas loss. I mean, you look at the St. Louis game, I think that was won on a last second shot. You look at, even some of their games they had canceled. God, I would have loved to have seen Iona play Seton Hall. I would have loved to have seen that game. I think that would have been another, major game for Iona to get some confidence there. With this team, again, they can beat you in multiple ways. This team is the most Purdue team out of every other team in the nation. They can beat you by slowing the game down, and it's a race to 65 to 70. And then they could also speed the game up and outrace you. We saw that in their game against Monmouth, where they dropped 86 to win. Manhattan, where they had to drop 88 to win. Fairfield, where they had to put up 80. But then we've also seen them play games where it's 65-53, or they're holding Liberty to 50 points. Rick Pitino has always done this, where especially when he was at U of L, where he would have games where they win 50 to 37, and then the very next game win 90 to 73. And it just he always makes these teams that can flip a switch. And I like Iona. One team we haven't mentioned that I think is going to be a major headache, as they always are when they get into tournament play, is Cleveland State. At this point, I would say the favorite to win the Horizon. They're 19-7. Mm-hmm. The thing with Cleveland State is, again, they're just one of those teams that will beat you at all three levels. They like to play a lot of full court press. That modulates into zone as they get into the half court. And another big thing with them is they have guys who just go out and get a bucket in clutch situations. They'll have a tough test with Purdue Fort Wayne and Wright State both, but I think it's Cleveland State's conference to lose. And if they get in, they're going to be a 2-15 or 3-14. That's another team where I look at them and I say, I really don't want to play you. Just because they have the tournament experience, the tournament pedigree, and they're kind of like a gnat. You swing at them a lot, and they never go away. And I think really the last team that I think we should really think about is a team a conference that I have really lost any care in. That's the Atlantic Sun, because the team I had a lot of stake in, Bellarmine, obviously can't be in postseason contention, even though UIC can, and there's some weird rules being shifted around the Horizon League for UIC. The Atlantic Sun says no.
Yeah, I hate the conferences have been doing that. The Colonial is doing that to James Madison. James Madison sitting at 6-10, probably not a threat to, Wilmington, Towson, or Hofstra. But in the era that we live in, with these, really the constant shift of conferences, really either driven by football or chasing some competition, maybe like Murray State and Belmont are. Let the kids play. Like, excluding teams from conference tournaments is not a good look. Let the kids play is really all I have to say. Bellarmine obviously is in a bit of a different situation. They're transitioning from Division II. They still have another year to go. But it's a shame. It's a shame. I think Bellarmine made the ASUN conference tournament final last year, and then Liberty kind of just got the automatic bid by default, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, and that's the thing, man. When Bellarmine jumped, they were probably the most ready a Division II team has been when they made the jump. And kudos to those kids, man, because their first year, I think they went like 6-19 and kind of struggled to find their path. Nobody would schedule them in non-conference because it was like one of those games where like it wouldn't mean a whole lot, even for confidence boosting and things like that. And then this year again, they've looked really good at times. But the team I want to focus on is Liberty. I understand 10-3, probably not even the favorites to win their conference, but some of their wins have been really big. They have they have a win against UNI on the road. They've played close with teams like BYU, LSU early in the season until foul trouble kind of got them, but they blew out Missouri at home. This is one of those teams where if they get hot, and they've kind of been there here recently, other than a slip up against North Florida and Jacksonville.
Yeah,
I like where this team is going.
yeah, and it doesn't hurt for them to have a 23-point a game scorer in Darius McGee.
Yeah, they play they play pretty good team basketball. I would say I would like Liberty in a lot of 4 versus 13 matchups where maybe they're getting like maybe they're getting a team like Wisconsin or something like that where they can also play this team bully ball. I would like to see them. I think they can do it. And I wouldn't be shocked if they did pull off an upset like that. But that's really the last one I have that I wanted to hit on.
Yeah, and that's pretty much about it for our conference or our college basketball wrap up. It has been an absolute journey. Thank you all for joining us. Zach, is there anything that you want to finish on? Anything that we didn't cover?
Yeah, I actually want to talk about the women's side real quick. Probably doesn't get enough press. How much fun the women's side of college basketball has been this year. There's no like outright like guaranteed to blow out everybody team this year. In the past it's been UConn or teams like that. I would be shocked if South Carolina, who's 25-1, still won the title this year. There's just not like a team that's like that physically dominant or that outclass, that much capable of outclassing everybody. We have IU, who's currently in 10th at 19-5. They look like they're going to cruise at Iowa. But there's also a lot of teams on the outside looking in. IUPUI picked up a loss this past weekend against Wisconsin Green Bay on the road after playing 6 games in a row on the road. That's a really tough schedule to finish your year on.
Green Bay, that's a good women's program that they have up there.
And in doing so, they didn't receive any votes this time around for the media poll, but the one thing is I will be talking with Macy Williams of the IUPUI women's team, talk about their overtime loss to Michigan, their win at Iowa, first win over a top 25 team of all time for our program, and then her thoughts on this coming tournament, because her and I have talked off camera before about it. She's like, yeah, I think we can beat pretty much anybody if we get a matchup with these teams. And you see that when literally the only team with 1 loss is South Carolina. Everybody else is 3, 4, 5 losses, even historically dominant teams. Tennessee at 21-6, UConn at 19-5, U of L 23-3. Notre Dame, who has been as high as number 2, number 1 in most recent seasons, 20-6 this year. I would put a lot of mid-major schools in conversations to go knock them off. BYU 23-2, I think is the number 1 rated mid-major school. Florida Gulf Coast is 24-2. They have been on a roll here recently. I think they won like eight in a row. Even schools like Princeton, UCF, Liberty, Toledo, Dayton, all these schools, they're going to be in these like 5-12s. They're going to be in these 8-9s. They're going to make a lot of noise. They're going to give some hell to some of these bigger programs. And it can't go understated enough. If you like basketball, you should be watching some of these teams. IUPUI, they have a team that switches 5 out. Every player can guard all 5 positions on the court all the time. They're one of the few teams I've ever seen in women's basketball do it that way. If you really like physically dominant teams, go watch South Carolina. If you want to watch a track meet, watch Iowa play basketball. They're a women's team. They've got a couple of players on their team who like to shoot from the logo pretty frequently. I would check out Iowa's women's team if that's your kind of thing. But really, that's all I had was kind of a plug for that interview coming up, and then also, some other content we'll have coming out where we might get Mark back on to chat about the NBA when we get, when the NBA resumes, and then, yeah, man, we're like 3 weeks away from conference tourney starting, or 2 weeks away, and then let's go.
It's gonna be fun. It's this is my favorite time of the year, Zach.
The NBA trade deadline is literally like Christmas in February, and then March Madness is like the entire Christmas.
This is like Christmas, your birthday, and Halloween wrapped into one.
Yeah, it's awesome. So it's like sports lover's dream. I will say this, I think IU's going to pick up another close loss here in the Big Ten. Looks like to Ohio State. So
yeah, down 5 with 47 seconds left in overtime. I've been watching this game on my other monitor. IU has just not gotten anything to fall. Ohio State has gotten a lot of the bounces in this game. It's if Indiana does lose this one, it's going to be another rough loss for them, dropping them to 16-10. And then you're talking about really, I think, 3 must-win games: Maryland versus Maryland, at Minnesota, and then versus Rutgers for Indiana to really, I think, stand a chance to get.
Yeah, and that Purdue game is.
I think Michigan. If Michigan loses a few games, that's good for Indiana. But a little bit of interesting here. We have a technical foul on EJ Liddell. I'm not sure if anything is going the Indiana way, but double technical here. So with that, again, guys, thank you for listening to our college basketball prospectus, our college basketball term paper here. We're going to be dropping some more, hopefully dropping some more college basketball stuff, from here to the end of the year. Follow us into the tournament. I'm sure we'll be very active on social media there. But Zach, thank you for joining me. Thank you for allowing me to produce this episode. And I hope you do a good job editing it.
Yeah, I mean, of course, editing's the fun part, right? But yeah, so follow us on twitter.com/the6manpod, THEE. We rebranded. We're getting a new logo that'll debut tomorrow. Doing the interview.
Also, one quick. Manu Ginobili, nominated for the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame. We love to see it.
Yeah, love to see it. 6-man, probably the greatest 6-man of all time.
The 6th man.
It'll definitely be awesome that he gets in. And, shout out to Greg Popovich for, basically making, 7 Hall of Famers over the course of his coaching tenure here. So, anyway, that's going to wrap this up. And then, like I said, be on the lookout for other content from us, written content. You can find us on our website. We also tweet a lot of rambunctious shit. Have a wonderful night wherever you might be listening. And go Hoosiers.